Alrighty, it is noon and we are recording. Hello and welcome back to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. Today we are on the second week of our exploration of Eudora Welty and Ross Macdonald's correspondence. In Meanwhile, There Are Letters, co-edited by Suzanne Mars and Tom Nolan. During this series, we will read and discuss a chapter each week. My name is Anna Traylor, the Special Projects Coordinator at Eudora Welty House and Garden. And we are grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and Professor Emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. First, just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet, you may have to tap the screen, or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat as well, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and again. And I also collect the weekly chat transcripts to send in the newsletter at the conclusion of our series. But if you would like access to this working document, please reach out to me at info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. With that, Suzanne, where shall we begin our discussion?
Well, I'm going to say that I'm going to begin with a regret here, and hopefully this will resolve in time. But Tom Nolan, Anna and I've just been on the phone with him. He's trying to join our meeting, but has not been able to so far. So he's struggling with some technical issues, and we hope we get solved them. And I hope for your sake we get solved them too, because he knows a hell of a lot more about Ross Macdonald than I do. But I'll try to bear up and share what I do know as we talk about it. Let me suggest that we today we structure our discussions around two books. There are three big books that are mentioned here. One is One Time, One Place, Eudora's book of photographs, which was reviewed in the New Yorker on Christmas Day of 1971. But then in the spring, the publication of The Optimist's Daughter. And then later in the year, Tom Nolan sends the manuscript, the typescript of his novel, Sleeping Beauty, to Eudora to talk about. So I'm hoping that we can spend a good bit of time talking about The Optimist's Daughter first and what they have to say about it, then about Sleeping Beauty. And then I've got a lot of things I'd like to talk about, other things, and we can move on to those. So does that sound like a good enough plan to y'all? Okay, so let's start with The Optimist's Daughter. I want to start on page 66 in the book, and I'll give you the date too, because I know sometimes that's more helpful than the page number. And this is where she is talking about revising it, that she's been revising it. And the letter is the letter of January 14, 1972. I will indeed send you and Margaret The Optimist's Daughter. There are supposed to be copies in the spring. It will be valuable to me to know your opinion, even more than it would be ordinarily, because you never saw it in its earlier version and would come to it cold and clear. I changed it some, then I changed it back some. It is so close to me that I've held on to it for 2 years, uncertain about publishing it alone as a book. It's about sad things, about a few of those things one can never ever change, but must try through fiction to make something with. The question is, did I make it? And without doing hurt to lives I cared about. I worked and hoped. There is one paragraph in it, key, that never existed in the first version at all, and it wouldn't be there now if it hadn't been for our writing each other some letters. You will know. It came nearly at the end, where and when it came back to me. Came back to me. So I wanted to mention that these revisions are available that she made at the Department of Archives and History. And one of the prompts to the revision process came from Reynolds Price. And we had an earlier letter where she mentioned that she was revising and making some changes and going back and revising again. And Price had written to her in October of 71 because when she showed him the new manuscript, he had loved the first version of the story, which was published in 1969 in the New Yorker. She had actually finished it in 1967 for the New Yorker, but the New Yorker wanted to print it in just one issue, so they had to wait till they had enough space in an issue to do that. So, so she published it in 69 and then went back and was revising it in the fall of 71 for book publication. And she added a lot. And she added a lot about Laurel's husband, Philip, and their lives together. And then she cut a lot of it out, took it back out. And probably the reason is because of this letter from Reynolds Price. And Anna has that letter, and I think we can put it available for people to read, can't we, Anna? The letter from Reynolds Price to Eudora. I'm just
Would
going
you
to
like for me to put it on the screen?
no, don't put it on the screen. Let's maybe if the can people just have access to it in the chat, maybe?
Sure, I'll send a PDF of it in the chat.
All right, good. Thanks. Here's just the paragraph I wanted to read because that's a long letter. Page by goes through the manuscript page by page. He says this: the new version is a different story. That may mean that I failed to see certain things that you wanted me to see earlier. In any case, what the additions make me see now is a gentler story, one in which the movement from pain into a more familiar kind of consolation. And that change is worked in two ways, I think, through the greater hardening and coarsening of Fay in this version and the addition of most of the material on Laurel's marriage. So those two things Price is talking about in terms of the revision. And then we come to the passage where Eudora talks about the addition of the material that Ken has suggested. So I'm wondering what you all want to talk about in terms of what she has to say about the Optimist Daughter and what Ken has to say about the Optimist Daughter. Anyone want to start us off? Yeah, Laura.
Can I just start with a question about who are the lives that she cared about, that she was worried about hurting?
Oh yeah, good question. The the most of the autographical parts of the Optimist Daughter are about her mother. And her mother, who has just died in 1966, and she finishes this manuscript in 67. So she's responding to the loss of her mother. And the parts in West Virginia are drawn from reality. Her mother's life in West Virginia as a young woman, taking her father on a raft to Baltimore, where he dies in the hospital, and she has to, she's 16 years old, little girl. You don't know anyone in Baltimore, and she has to go back alone. The parts about young Laurel being taken to West Virginia, that's Eudora being taken there as a child. And then there's a horrible scene in the hospital when Judge McKelvey's wife, Fay, sort of attacks him in his hospital bed. And that was drawn from experience, too. They're rather different sort of thing. It wasn't quite as violent an attack as it is in the Optimist Daughter, but her brother Edward's wife, coming to him in his hospital bed and shaking him and saying, get up from here. And so those things are drawn from experience. Yeah. What else? Anybody want to correct me on this? Anything else about the Optimist Daughter? Autobiographical backgrounds to the Optimist Daughter? Okay. So what do you think about what's going on here with the Optimist Daughter and the conversation about it here? Yeah, Harriet.
Um, I by here, I think you mean the letters between.
I do. The letters between Miller and Welty.
Yeah. What strikes me is how good readers they are of one another, in these letters back and forth about the books. And I'm looking at Ken saying, before the wonderful fingerprint passage, saying this is new. You've gotten into quite new territory, even for you. The whole business of the mother and the other place under the threat of the trapped bird, and even the confluences opening out filled me with joy. I felt as though I'd been allowed to leave a fingerprint in your enduring clay, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. But I just think that his recognition that she's moving into autobiographical territory that she hasn't been in before. I think that when he um, talks about um, uh, talks about let me see if I can find the passage that I want. Um, um, but it's a subject, one of its subjects, um, the pain and possibility of growth, that is not too common in American letters. Pain is so much regarded as merely terminal. Um, and, I'm thinking about the smartness of reading um, the, op the Optimist's Daughter and recognizing that it's not about pain being terminal, but about the possibility of growth. Um, and I won't go on to talk about Eudora's responses to Ken, but I just think that they're both really smart readers of one another, and that the letters are valuable because of that.
Yeah, I think that's really a powerful one, and it's one that he needs to hear in 1972 because his daughter has just died. Very tragic life she has led, and then her death, unexpected at age 31, and the pain he has felt. His wife can't write, and the book says pain is not terminal. Well, and and the way it says pain is not terminal is through that image of confluence. That's the real thing that brings it out, I think. Monica.
Well, what y'all are talking about brings me to what was one of my very favorite parts of this chapter, which was Ken's letter from July 22nd, 1972, where he talks about after he read Reynolds Price's volume of essays. Um, he says, all three of us seem to live very much in feeling, the only way to live. I love that sentence so much, and it seems to sum up so much of, their friendship and what we're talking about here, and in The Optimist Daughter, quite frankly.
All of us seem to live very much in feeling, the only way to live. The Optimist Daughter has sent me back again to your early stories. Yeah. Yeah. Joe Ellen.
I just wanted to note that the section that Harriet read, ending with confluences, opening out, filled me with joy, seems to be a theme that carries through in today's readings in chapter 2. It's a year of uppers. There are conversations about the Optimist's Daughter, later conversations about Sleeping Beauty, but he tells her that her life keeps going on in full spate and is renewed. This is around page 81, 84, that he expects her to glide effortlessly until about 100. And there's just, he and Margaret are getting along better. This section ends with the cranes, which is just another beautiful passage, which we'll probably get to. But the conversation about beauty at the end of their section on Sleeping Beauty. But this glide through this chapter, I think really shows, he even says that he and Margaret are getting past some of the grief and they're biking a lot. And it ends with that image of the cranes. And I really just enjoyed this chapter.
And the confluence, the passage that she has recalled in their letters, the confluence of the two rivers. In The Optimist's Daughter, Laurel and Phil see the confluence on their wedding journey to Mississippi to be married. But then after Phil's death, Laurel still feels that confluence, and that confluence is nothing but the continuity of love, the continuity of love. And so, and these recurrences of connections, the power of memory to connect us to the past, the connections we have with other people that connect people that we've lost, that connect us to people in our present, this kind of opening out of experience, and that death is not final, loss is not final. there is this continuity of love and memory, you know. Yeah, so it is a wonderful thing there. Um, I do think they are wonderful readers of each other's fiction. And I'm glad Harriet brought that up. Anything else about the Optimist's Daughter? Should we talk about Sleeping Beauty?
Really quickly before we move on, just really quickly, I do want to draw our attention to the comments in the chat. John mentions that Ken prevailed on Eudora to add the confluence part, and it leads to other discussions of confluence. And before that, Rachel asks if someone could speak to Welty's revision process, specifically how often she shared unfinished work with other writers. From her biography and correspondence, one can get a sense that her sharing was more.
I've lost your, Anna, you're not coming through on audio here.
Back. Am I back?
Yes, you are.
Yay. To
Oh, we lost you again.
Now we've lost you, yeah. I can speak to her revision and who she shared her revisions with, and she wasn't likely to share them with a lot of people, but she would share revisions with someone like William Maxwell or Mary Lou Aswell or Reynolds Price. I mean, she sent him the Optim's Daughter, the manuscript to look at. Dermot Russell, of course, was her agent, read everything. So there were people, and she did rely on readers and the virtue of having other people read your work before you finish your revisions. But it wouldn't have been just anyone. It was a select audience. You know, Joellen and then Jane.
Two quick things. I like the comment that Miller makes in that same section that Harriet read, that toward the end, quite new territory is opened up, quotes, even for you. And that took me back to the whole biographical urge from chapter 1, that where quite a bit was said and works for me as a kind of bridge to what's coming. And stepping off the note of how well they read each other, they start making brief allusions to, in this case, losing battles. He said, yellow acacia dust is everywhere. Death of a traveling salesman, other things that just, it's not like he just read them necessarily, but things get pulled out of the air and tucked into their letters, which is just lovely.
Yes. Jane, thank you.
Okay, I have a question, and something has eluded me as I read this chapter, and maybe you can help me understand. Her character in The Optimist's Daughter is named Laurel,
Right.
but his character also in his book is named Laurel, which is like based on his daughter, Linda. But was this just a coincidence that they had the same names in their books?
We don't really know that. It almost seems not a coincidence. It almost seems as if he's chosen that name because of knowing the name of Welty's character, but we don't know that for sure.
So The Optimist's Daughter was written before The Sleeping Beauty.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah. And had been published, in 69. So, yeah. So it was, the name Laurel was set, and he would have known it. And of course, he read The Optimist's Daughter while he was working on his own novel. But whether he did it intentionally or not is something we can't be sure of. Yeah, but they do have the same name.
There are two quick things. Welty says that he had told her he was using it, but it's also established that he had not read the 1969 Optimist's Daughter.
Yeah. All right. Well, shall we talk about Sleeping Beauty coming hard on the heels of The Optimist's Daughter here? Pearl. There you are.
Yeah, it's late, all things with the house, but I'm back in my house for the moment anyway. A couple of things I was noticing at the beginning of the chapter. This is overall commentary. At the beginning of the chapter, I recognized that they were not responding the very next day, that there's a little bit more space between the letters, the responses to each other's letters. And I think that is explained by the fact that he was working on his novel, and she and Welty was traveling more.
Mhm.
And so it's understandable. But as soon as they have something to read of one another, they start in right away again. And so you pick up that intensity and that passion that we talked about last time. I was surprised by a couple of things. One, when Welty writes about having received the National Institute of Arts and Letters gold medal, it to me was a bit of a shock because I always thought of her as so modest, but because she, she doesn't brag, but she tells him, and she tells him how she feels about it and about that glorious scene about Catherine Ann Porter in her silk pajamas.
Pallas Athena.
But it said to me then that how much she trusted him, how much she wanted to share with him, and it brought back that intimacy that we had highlighted last time.
Yeah.
That was also surprised, and I love this. On October 10th, Ken writes to Eudora, I dreamt of you last night, and this morning on the wings of the dream, I went down to the PO. I mean, the wings of a dream. I just love that.
Mm-hmm.
But Welty does not mention that dream. First, she writes back right away, oh, I got the manuscript. Thank you very much. I'm going to read it and then respond. And she does. But I just wondered, like, I had a little.
I think she does say, I'm glad you sent it on the dream. I think she says.
But it was like a little, like, over the top in a sense.
Yeah.
And I wondered if she felt a little bit shy then about responding more fully to that aspect of it. And I'm also curious, and maybe you or Tom can answer at some point. I don't see him here today, but
he's trying to join us.
He's here, I think.
Okay.
Oh, Tom, are you on?
I just am curious what you think about how consciously Welty is always including Margaret, and Ken is always including Margaret. I mean, it's always, like, okay, don't think anything's going on. We do have this incredible special thing, but I know that there's 3 people involved here. So it seems like, I just wonder how consciously they are protecting themselves, maybe, and their beautiful relationship.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that's why he says it. He's always talking, especially early in this chapter, about we did this, we sent our love. And Eudora is constantly trying to include Margaret. And I think it's that both of them are trying to protect the relationship by not overstepping the bounds here. But
they should be read, then obviously Margaret would say, oh yeah, well, I'm there, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's Laura and then Joellen.
I was just going to follow up. I was paying attention to the letter dates and the timing as well, like Pearl. And the letter, I was hoping we could talk about the letter that he wrote on February 29th, which was leap year day. And that's the one where I thought it was maybe just me that he was using. That's where he says that how much I loved losing battles and I love its author. And then, of course, Margaret agrees, is added on at the very end. But I was thinking about, I was like, is it just me? Is it just me that I'm reading in that he's using losing battles, sort of like innuendo? I thought, if it's just me, it's like, but surely she would have picked up on that too. And I mean, I'm reading it, and then I think, well, it's almost a month before she responds, which, I mean, traveling and that sort of thing. But I was thinking it had to be a long month for him to get that letter back. But it seems to me like, I mean, she did pick up on that, because she writes, your beautiful letter I didn't deserve. It made me wish I did or could some way, even this late. Am I reading into that or no?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I am looking for Tom here because
I think Tom has disappeared once more. We probably are still having audio issues. Hopefully he'll be able to join us at a later date, but I feel the same way, Laura. I can't wait to talk to you guys more about this in chapter 3.
Now, well, and in chapter 3, there's going to be, I don't know whether to spoil the suspense or not.
Don't spoil it, Suzanne.
All right, I won't. There's an incident that Reynolds told me about that would speak to this, but I'll keep mum until next time. Then I will tell all.
It's shocking.
Yeah, Joe Ellen.
Tom Nolan last week is the only person who gave a hint to the fact that Margaret might well be uncomfortable. When we were talking about her not responding to Welty's beautiful letter, he said, I wrote it down. He says, there might be an aspect to Ken's relationship with her that inspired her. I can't read a word, but it's at least kind of put her into competition. And at some point, I know that when Welty was visiting for the writers' conference in Santa Barbara, it's reported that Margaret turned to her and quipped, you know, that I read your letters to him when he's out of town. And so I think they were very much aware of this. It wasn't private when Ken later in his life had hidden his letters to Eudora Welty in the pool house, as I believe.
That comes later on.
Oh, Suzanne somebody mentioned it last time. But anyway, so it was difficult. And so I've kind of been tracking, especially in this chapter too. They're back and forth on it. And this is the joyous chapter. So Eudora will say, with love to you and to Margaret and Jimmy too. And there's all of that inclusion until something exciting happens. And then it's back to my best to Margaret, then love Eudora. And so they slide around. But I think what we really need to note is that he can write much more intimately to her than she can write back to him. And I think that there is some reservation that's been commented on.
Yeah, I think there's reservation. I think the conflict you're talking about does come later in the correspondence, but I think the roots of it are here. Yeah, the roots of it are here. All right. What else? Shall we talk about Sleeping Beauty, which is also autobiographical and is also Ken's way of trying to come to terms with experience. It's about two things that coincide. One is the oil spill, and he thought that was the greatest danger ecologically to our country with the ocean and the oil spills, tankers. And there was a huge oil spill in Santa Barbara in 1969. And then in 1970, his daughter Linda, age 31, dies after. And this is what I wanted Tom to talk about because he could do it so much better than I, but I'll give it my best shot. And if anyone has read his biography of Ross Macdonald, very nice book, you might join in. But his daughter had had a very troubled youth. Her parents, the atmosphere at home, her parents argued a lot. There was a kind of volatile atmosphere at home. At age 16, she had gone out supposedly to visit a friend, but she never got to her friends. And she had stopped, bought some wine at a place where she knew 16-year-old girls could buy wine, was drinking, and hit a young boy and killed him. Hit and run. So she left the scene of the accident, a hit and run accident. So she was brought up on charges. She was a minor. It was recommended that that she have probation, and it was supposed to be an 8-year probation. I guess it was an 8-year probation. But a horrible thing for the poor young man who was killed, but also for the Miller family themselves, the torment of this. Then she went to college at the University of California at Davis. And while she was at Davis, still on probation, she decided to check herself out of the dorm one night. She's supposed to be back at 2:30 in the morning. So she checks out of the dorm and goes with two young men who are not students supposedly to Sacramento, but really they go to the state line of Nevada where there's a Harrah's casino and they're gambling. And she at some point gets nervous because she doesn't want to violate her probation. I need to get back to my dorm. Nobody will leave. They're winning money. They don't want to leave. She gets picked. She manages to get herself a ride with someone else, but they don't go back to Davis to the dormitory. Then this man leaves her someplace. She gets herself to ultimately to Reno, I think. Several encounters with different men along the way. Possibly sexual contact with at least one of them, and her father. So she's been missing for, in the end, she's missing for 10 days. Her father distraught, going to the press. His daughter is missing. Help us find her. It becomes a big news story. And the press then are following him, and he's having to hide from them, and the authorities are threatening to arrest her, and all hell is broken loose. And finally, whether she has seen the newspaper articles or whether a detective Ken has hired finds her, she is found. She gets in touch with her mother, and Ken needs to get to see her, get to pick her up. And I think I'm getting this right. I so wish Tom were with us, but he calls his friend Dick Lidd, the very man who wrote the book on Ford Maddox Ford, and says, the press is following me. I need to go and pick up Linda. Can you pick me up at a certain place? And pick me up on the corner of such and such and such and such, and we'll drive to Nevada and get her. And he says, of course. Dick Lidd says, of course. And they do that, and then he brings them back. And they don't file charges against her, and she is rescued from this. And then she gets her life back in order, although it's not quite clear whether she was taking drugs along the way. Gets her life back in order, marries a computer programmer. They have a child. All seems to be going well. And she goes to bed one night and doesn't wake up. A stroke, perhaps an overdose, and dies. So this is the life of Linda Jane Miller. And Ken is disguising it in his Laurel, Lennox, using aspects of her life. And he intersects that with the oil spill, so that when Lou Archer first meets Laurel Lennox, it's on the beach, and she has a bird who's been covered in oil and is going to die because of the oil spill. And so these two massive concerns of him come together in Sleeping Beauty. So what about their letters about Sleeping Beauty? Does anybody want to say anything else about that? If I've got it wrong, I'm going to get Pearl.
I think that was fine. I haven't read that passage in Tom's book yet. But the point is that his life wasn't that pretty, and he had a lot of concerns and a lot of stresses that parallel in some ways the kinds of stresses that Welty had with the death of her first brother, and then of her mother and her father, mother and other brother, going all the way back to the father, perhaps. And it's a beautiful parallel story when you know the authors.
Right.
And how
they are both responding to the same sorts of pressures, and
there's
losses.
Kind of yet another confluence of these two lives through their fiction, actually.
That you are asked the question, why is she listed as Linda Miller? And I think that, and Tom can speak to this when we get him back, that he did not list the father's name because he didn't want him to be pursued. So I think that's the reason that's going on. I think that Tom was. I now know the father's name. Made it my point to look it up because I wanted to tell you about what happens to Jimmy, but I won't. I'm not going to do that yet. But anyway, uh, so I know his name, but it's not listed. I think that's the reason it's not in the biography. Yeah. Joe Ellen, did you have
Oh,
something? Nope.
yeah, I have. I was just thinking that the Welty had a leg up reading
Mhm.
Sleeping Beauty because Margaret Miller has written about the fire, and she would be aware of certain autobiographical aspects because of her. Um, and that was just my mind was drifting, took me back to Margaret not answering her letter. And I had another theory about that because Welty was so effusive. Um, does anybody know whether Welty called any other writer's work radiant
Oh, I love
besides
that. I
Jane
love that you
Austen
pointed
and
that
Henry Green? She calls Margaret's book radiant, both to Ken before she writes to Margaret and to Margaret. And all I can think of are those three times. And
Jane
Margaret,
Austen.
given conflicting feelings, might simply have been abashed. But with Birds and the Beasts were there, she's been more a part of this chapter and what's going on for me.
I will point out Margaret is going to send Eudora a letter saying thank you. You know, you helped me return to writing, so it's not going to be only
Hmm.
kind of
Good.
tension. Harriet.
I was just going to say that, when I said that last week, what I was thinking about, that is that Margaret blew it by not responding. Um, I was thinking about how many relationships that she has had where she is a friend of Dermot and his wife, and Robert Penn Warren and his wife. That the being a friend of the couple, or William J. Smith and
Mhm.
his wife, um, that there's that she I think that she's starting out from that position, um, and um, and and so that refrain about Margaret is it becomes hollow for us as readers who keep hearing it, um, but um, but I think in the when she writes that letter, she's reaching for that, and yeah.
And this was a strain in her relationship with Rosie Russell, too. I mean, Rosie Russell, Dermot's wife, said, when we have a party, it doesn't take 5 minutes and all the men are in orbit around your door. uh, and when I talked to uh, Pam Jessup, Dermot Russell's daughter, I said, what do you think it was that your father and Eudora had so much in common? And she said they were both very attractive to the opposite sex. So, so that Eudora, Eudora's experienced in these kind of relationships. I don't think it was ever a strain with William Maxwell and Emmy, but I do think it was with Dermot and Rosie, and she's anticipating it here, I think. Yeah,
I
Pearl.
took Tom's remark last time about it being about their mourning, and Margaret's being in a period of mourning,
Yes.
um, as a game changer for me. That as I started thinking about that, um, and thinking how people respond to grief differently, and some people withdraw from social contacts, and so there may be more than going on, and I appreciated Tom's pointing out that Margaret is in a special period of her life. Um,
And
uh,
she's not able to write fiction uh, either at this time. Yeah, Pearl.
That's maybe partly wisdom on Margaret's part that she withdraws from competition with which she hadn't necessarily expressed competition with her husband, but here he has another auteur, so to speak. He has someone else to communicate about writing with. And so she wisely perhaps takes herself out of that to work on herself and to be a super bicycler and be fit in body, if not in mind. But I raised my hand to point out two things. One, on October 2nd, Ken closes his letter saying, I've been reading Hawthorne chronologically with respect bordering on awe. It's like watching American soul being created before one's eyes, taking us from the frontiers to the brink of Henry James. And this was in 72. And in 1983, when the Hawthorne Library of America volumes came out, I think I'm right. I didn't have all my stuff to check. Welty goes and makes a speech about Hawthorne and reads some passages from Hawthorne. So I'm curious to look at that again and see if she uses any of this sort of phrasing from the frontiers to the brink of Henry James, which is such a gorgeous, gorgeous phrase.
Thank you for mentioning that. I hadn't thought of it, but that you're right. And then isn't it Hawthorne that she speaks at the dedication at the church in New York?
Yeah, for the Library of America volume.
Corner sort of of America. Yeah. And also at the Library of America on Hawthorne. Yeah. So
exactly. We have to look and see if
this link, that's really
after their correspondence unfortunately ends. Which brings me to my second point. Because I have read these letters and have read all of Lou Archer's stories and all the, Sleeping Beauty, all those things, I have such a dread every time Ken mentions being failing, or this is toward the end, or he's not going to write another book. I mean, I'm haunted by that future that I unfortunately know is coming.
I know every time he mentions bike riding again, I think, oh, Ken, you just said that in the last letter. Why do you keep coming back to it? And then I think, oh no, here it comes. here comes the memory loss. But I maybe not quite yet. Yeah, Joellen.
Go ahead, Pearl.
No, I don't want anybody else to pay attention to that. Just enjoy the letters.
Yeah.
To the darkness.
Yeah.
The mention of Hawthorne reminded me of the darkness. That's what enchanted Melville and informed Moby Dick. But there is darkness here and maybe Ken keeps referring to bike riding because he's pushing through to the lighter. In this book, you mentioned the gas spill. In Optimist's Daughter, we have Philip Hand at war, blowing up and drowning at sea. We have Ken Miller mentions his own experience with gas spilling on a ship in the Pacific. Vietnam.
That also was in Sleeping Beauty. He uses that in Sleeping.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm going with this, because the big fire is in Sleeping Beauty, but he even mentions allusions to Vietnam. This section ends with a hint about Watergate, our coming constitutional crisis. And even though he was telling Welty, you're going to live till 100 and not slow down, she's already reporting on the arthritis in her right hand. So there's a mix of these things. And it comes out beautifully, I think, in Welty's comments about Sleeping Beauty, where she appreciates Miller's genre, which he calls plot stories like mine. And she applauds him for taking on a popular form and making it something entirely his own, which we'll be talking about more if we read The Underground Man. And then Sleeping Beauty, the abstract noun, they're working their way toward beauty is sleeping, but perhaps she'll wake up. And so I really thought that conversation was lovely. And there's some pretty negative stuff in Sleeping Beauty, but she appreciates his ending. They both work their way kind of through it.
And they're both clearly appalled by what's going on in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah.
Both clearly aware of ecological crisis, the ecological crisis in the country. So yeah, there's that. Harriet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, that, it's one thing to talk about the autobiographical elements here, but another thread are Ken's civic and ecological concerns. And he writes, it's sort of bold that he sends her his manuscript in progress. Not many writers want to share the work that is not ready yet. But he says it has honest work in it, and some of the things that concern me. And he's talking about the Afghan spill, and then he's going to say, without ever mentioning Vietnam, the book is somewhat about it, and the way in which Okinawa is a preparation for Vietnam. And then she responds by saying, the filth and the fires of all war are implied, and say Vietnam, although you leave it unspoken. The intensity of the scenes have some moral source and a moral strength. Think of all the time you've been, I think all this time you've been taking a popular form and making it something entirely your own. And again, I was thinking about what good readers they are of one another. That she recognizes that what makes him special is the way in which he takes the mystery form and makes it a vehicle for these concerns that hasn't been there before.
It's something that gets him attacked by people who don't want him to get above his ranks. But it's something Eudora really admires him for, taking this popular form and using it to confront important issues, using plot as a metaphor, as she says plot always is. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say, was I've been following the thread of the worry that we have when as we age about what happens next. I mean, I just feel it so strong in comments like grateful that I was able to get it written. Rewriting is less impossible. Excuse the foul writing. It seems to get worse every month. Revising, having never worked this hard in my life. I have to wait to a later book. When he dedicates it to her, he says, I have to wait. If I have to wait till a later book, my writing may fall off in the meantime. I think he's already very aware of changes and worried about them.
And I'm glad we finally mentioned that. I should have done it sooner. This is the book he asked to dedicate to her. May I have the privilege of dedicating this book to you? And she's, of course, honored to have the book dedicated to her. And he's going to take some criticism later on for having done that. But here is this heartfelt dedication of a book. And you have a sense that maybe the Optimist's Daughter helped open the way for this kind of work that he's doing. Bill, I'm glad to see you, Bill.
And I'm glad to be here. Sorry I missed last week. Something you just said reminded me of something from his letter on dated December 4th to Eudora. And he's talking about his time in Michigan. He said he made one speech about the intention of popular art, which is to express a society to itself in terms it can understand. And it just reminded me of what you just said, that and I had never thought about popular art that way. And it changes the way I'm reading her favorite book of his, which I looked up and got something about, let me see if I can get it, The Far Side of the Dollar.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to read that book differently now that I saw what he was writing, that particular intention of his in popular art.
I think it's Dostoevsky that Ken Miller says. Dostoevsky is really a mystery writer. He's the greatest. Yeah, he's the greatest one. And here's what the genre can be.
Yeah.
Joe Ellen.
One of the profundities in the section that we read today is mentioned on 101 when Miller, I keep wanting to call him Macdonald, Miller is writing about the cranes in flight, and he alludes to Welty's allusion to a line from his novel, which is about live things in the air at all times, as if to
she says that
preserve
brings tears to her eyes to read it.
Yeah. And this starts on page 94, and I'm quoting from 101, as if to preserve some natural balance which is required. I read that as complex, as though in order to stay alive, these birds need to stay in the air. But it also reminded me of Welty's eloquence again in her letter to Margaret, where she talks about radiance. She uses burst of knowledge and finding out, seeing it precisely in full response, exuberance and spirit, the rush to learn, wholehearted. That made me believe she wasn't just, writing a polite letter to Margaret, but those pieces, they're reaching toward the light and the exuberant. I loved coming, the letter to Margaret pretty much ended chapter 1. And that seems to carry through in chapter 2, which we end with the cranes.
There is a kind of a confluence here also. So, yeah, Pearl.
That just reminded me that one of the joys I have in reading this is Welty discovering another whole piece of nature by identifying the birds and thinking about the birds differently. Where we always think about the garden and the flowers, and we've done a lot of reading and thinking about that and seeing and smelling the flowers, so to speak. But I love how now here's one more new thing that Ken is giving her, is this attention, more close attention to the birds.
Yeah, the birds, the sound of the birds. I did want to point out that we do find out about the book that Eudora had given to her brother during the war when he was serving in the Pacific, and it's Margaret Miller's novel Iron Gates. And then she's seen it in her sister at her sister-in-law's house. So Walter has kept it, and there is that connection that to Margaret that goes way back to the time when her brother was in the South Pacific, to Ken when Ken was being on the ship with the fire, to the scene that he writes for Sleeping Beauty. Another confluence there. Yeah. Anything else about Sleeping Beauty? See, what did I have down? I wanted to talk about, Eudora later on is going to work on a manuscript she never finishes called The Shadow Club. I thought Harriet might want to say something. And The Shadow Club, I think, is pretty clearly a response to Sleeping Beauty. It echoes the plot of Sleeping Beauty. And so here she is working on this kind of mystery herself, never brings it to completion. Harriet, you know that better than I. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
No, I was always going to say that I just started thinking about that and saying, oh, I have to go look at this more closely. It's certainly there, and I think one of the things I was interested in this chapter were her comments about interviews, and in she talks about them as being tests that she might fail. And she talks about the Henry Mitchell interview, which is a wonderful piece, but it's hardly an interview. It is a flight of Henry Mitchell's, and she talks about him being a wild man, and how maybe some of the things that he writes as hers are his, as they have roamed around in a long conversation at her house over dinner, and he's produced this interview. But she says the other one is the school teacher who has and in that piece,
Charles Bunting, I think, yeah.
It's I'm blocking out his name. Charles Bunting. It's just Charles Bunting interview, and she says that she passes it only because she goes back and corrects it herself, so that I can see her asking to read it before he publishes it, and in there she's talking about writing. I think The Last of the Figs. And so I just pulled out the conversations to take a look at it again. So next time,
Ken says you're not done writing, but in fact, she has published her last novel. But she's going to keep writing, and she tries to write a novel called The Last of the Figs. She tries to write one called The Shadow Club. She tries to write one called Henry, and none of them None of them does she bring to completion. And part of it is a response to him and the devastation she feels, I think, at losses he is going to incur. Yeah, Pearl.
He does note all the way through that her life writing, the memoir, the little life piece that is in the beginning of One Time, One Place, is an indication that he wants to hear more about her life. And I think after we read this and we're thinking about the uses of fiction and not making a novel, but there's a lot of these letters that suggest things to come forward in one writer's beginnings, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's also a fact that Ken is confiding in her in many ways, but he doesn't tell her about the details about his daughter. He doesn't mention that Dick Lidd was the man who drove him to rescue his daughter. So yeah, there is that too, that reticence.
And you begin to see in this chapter them thinking about meeting. As he says, I've had this dream and I was at your place, and she sends him her phone number, and it's like we realize he hasn't had it, and says, maybe I can meet you somewhere, you and Margaret somewhere, if you're not going to make it all the way to Jackson. But the fact that this relationship is limited to letters. There's so much is left out that that we know more than letters. It's an interesting aspect of this relationship.
By the way, Eudora didn't like talking on the phone, and
right.
So she had the phone, but she doesn't really communicate a lot on the phone. The letters, that was the medium, yeah. Bill and then Joellen.
Yeah, this is a quick one. It's from the last letter from Ken in the chapter and the final paragraph. And it reads, "Meanwhile, eat your Christmas cake and think that with the help of your books, I can reconstruct from its sweet, dense, subtle mass, as Proust reconstructed France, the whole blessed unknown South." I just thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, the Madeleine.
Yeah, exactly, the cookie.
Yeah. Joellen?
Bill just drew on the very word I was going to mention, whole. There's all of this confluence circling around. I thought of that trying to meet together. Eudora, when after he's told her about life on a barge or something, says she loves a world in itself of any kind, whole experiences, the whole morning world in Optimist's Daughter. And there's something that's just embracing in this chapter. I hope it's not the joyous high point of the letters. I haven't read them before, but it really is just bursting with joy.
Well, I think that might be a good place to stop. I have, and I'll do it next time. And we were going to show you a picture of the printing of a flock of guinea hens seen from a car of the poem that Eudora sent as a Christmas card. So we've got that. I have a story about Henry Green I want to tell, a biographical story. And I have one about the Hotel de Saint-Père in Paris, where Henri Coulette had been, and Eudora remembered the landlady there, and so I'm going to tell her story about that. But I'll save those little tidbits for later and turn this back over to Anna, I think.
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, we keep forgetting to cover the archival materials we have pulled to show you guys. Always cool to show those off. So next week, lots to start with. In the meantime, I hope that you guys will join us on the Facebook group. I'll drop that link in the chat as well. So if you want to join the conversation outside of Zoom, we do have that group going on Facebook. Please feel free to make posts and comments however you'd like, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.